Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to episode 88 of the Dads and Ed podcast. We are quickly approaching 100. I was actually doing the math, Devin.
Yep.
It will be this spring that we will hit 100. I don't have
Really?
exact dates, but yeah, we'll be in the let's see, lower 90s before Christmas break, and then probably March or April, somewhere in there, depending on when we get started back up. But
That's one of those things we should probably pay attention to and have something special for that night, I would assume,
we
right?
should have cupcakes.
We should have cupcakes.
I mean,
Virtual cupcakes are not nearly as good as real ones, but
no, I mean, you and I could have real ones.
that's true.
Maybe for our 100, we actually do it in the same room.
Ooh, there's an idea.
I don't know. It might ruin the flow. We'll have to see how iTech goes in a couple weeks ago.
I like how you thought about that for a second. You're like, yeah, I don't know. Maybe not.
Rewind that idea. Never mind. Now, that would be fun. You know, it'd be really fun if we did it at a sports bar.
I'm in.
Do a live show. I wonder if we have a sports bar that would host us.
No, that's a better question.
If you are in Omaha or Council Bluffs sports bar,
True,
and would like to host us, let us know.
I think I have an idea, but
okay. Well, we'll work on that. We might. Breaking news, folks. We might have something special for whenever the 100 comes up.
And this is the best part of this show is that, usually folks would talk about this and, we've talked to other people like Jesse last week about having show notes ahead of time. This just came up. This was just part of conversation.
It's not in our quote unquote show notes.
It is not. No.
Because it just came to mind. Most people think their ideas through before they say them. Right. We just think them while it's recording.
That's the beauty of our show. So.
My name is Josh Allen, Technology Integration Specialist, Lewis Central Community Schools. Excited to be here. 4 wonderful kids, 1 beautiful wife. It's a little toasty here in the Midwest for late September. I'm looking forward to Friday when it cools down.
Right. Yeah, I hear you. I'm Devin Schoening. I'm the Instructional Technology Program Lead in Council Bluffs Schools in Council Bluffs, Iowa. I have 2 great kids, a high schooler and a middle schooler, and we've talked about that, Grace and Claire. And my wife, who is also in education. So it's we're in full swing here in the Schoening household now.
Yep, it is late September. Probably been in school about a month now. For those of us in Iowa, coming up on that month. So
right.
All right. Well, if you have ideas of what we should do for the 100th show, tweet us at Dads and Ed. You probably have a better idea than we do. What did you do for your 100th show? You can always use the hashtag Dads and Ed. If you missed part of the show, check out our website, dadsanded.com, or by now, hopefully you've subscribed in iTunes or Google Play. Feel free to leave us a review. Leave us a 5-star rating. Don't leave us anything less than that. If you don't think it's 5-star, then just don't leave a rating. You can always search Dads and Ed to find those wonderful things in iTunes or Google Play. Also, make sure to check out the Education Podcast Network. That Education Podcast Network is going to come up later in the show. In my Sharing is Caring. You can check them out at edupodcastnetwork.com. All right. So last time we were on, my Sharing is Caring was an interview that I did on the Content Generation podcast hosted by our friends at Class Intercom. And since then, the follow-up episode came out. And one of the things that I said in the episode, which I didn't feel was totally controversial, probably still not really controversial, but the idea of digital citizenship. And my point in the podcast was, I don't think we should use the word digital anymore. I think we should just call it citizenship. And whether I articulated it well or not, if you've heard any of our shows, you can probably venture to guess it was probably not overly well articulated. My point isn't that digital citizenship is not important. My point is, too often we think it should be separate. It's just like having a computer class. Well, if it's not embedded in what you're already doing, then is it really going to make a huge difference? So my point was that everything should just be under a citizenship cloud, and how you treat people in person should be the same as how you treat them online. And I think too often digital kind of makes it a little bit too gray, in my opinion. So in the follow-up episode, Amber, who interviewed me, and Ben, one of the founders of Class Intercom, kind of, not really pushed back, but they just kind of had the discussion that they thought maybe digital should still be there. And Amber brought up a great point later when we were talking about it on Twitter, is in her line of work, which is normally she's a registered dietitian, that concept of digital citizenship really isn't there. It's not something they necessarily have to talk about nearly as much as we do in education. But anyway, that's my take. Where do you stand on that, Devin?
Well, I see your point, right? Right. I see your point in terms of we just call it citizenship. Being a good person is being a good person, whether you're on the computer or we're sitting face to face at a sports bar doing our podcast. It shouldn't matter. Shouldn't matter either of those places. That being a good person is being a good person. Now, I guess what I would argue is that if we don't emphasize some of the things, or we don't kind of disaggregate those two things, then they're really not the same, right? So I'll give you an example. We talked a lot about, when we went one-to-one years ago, we talked a lot about classroom management, right? We talked about management and how it changes once you have, every kid has a device in his or her hands. When I did a kind of a workshop for our teachers, a session with them on that, what I told them up front was, all those things that you learned about good classroom management and proximity and voice and all those things, those are still the things you're going to do now, even though every kid has a device. But we also did have some very specific strategies that would help them overcome some of the challenges that come with having devices in the hands of every kid, right? So whether that was sitting kids in a way in which you can see screens, if that was important to you, or whether that was creating a set of expectations in your classroom with kids about how they were going to act and interact when they have those devices. So, where I see it, classroom management being a thing, whether you have devices or you don't have devices, there were some very specific things that I think you try to do when you were in that space or teaching in a room that everybody had devices. In the same way that I think about, we say citizenship as a general umbrella is right, but there are some very specific things that change when we're trying to do that in an online space. Maybe?
Yeah, I understand that. I just think that there are differences. Don't get me wrong. I just think the foundational, how you treat people, should be the same regardless of the two. And I completely agree that it looks different. In a school setting, it's probably more different.
Yeah.
I just think if we're getting to what counselors talk about, how you treat people.
Yeah.
I just don't think there should be that much difference.
Do we see a big difference, though? And I don't know this answer. This isn't a leading question anyway. Do we see big differences in the way that kids interact with each other face-to-face versus the way that they interact in online spaces?
I would say so.
Is there a huge gap?
I would say, well, I mean, the research would say bullying, yes, would be the biggest thing.
Right.
So, and I guess maybe I'm not, when it comes to mind for me, maybe I'm not thinking of the farther down the road. I'm still thinking about how you treat the person next to you.
Yeah.
Whether they're on a device or not. That is kind of where I get stuck, I guess.
Right. And that I totally agree with that. Like I am not in any sort of disagreement with the fact that I think we should treat people well, whether we're sitting next to them or we're sitting thousands of miles away. However, I think if we see a giant gap there, then addressing that gap sometimes becomes the way that you build, like we're going to address this thing because it's so out of the norm from this other thing. And so maybe labeling it in that way has brought attention to it in a way that it wouldn't have otherwise. But I'm with you. And I also wonder this though, Josh, is it different for people who have been online for some time, right? So been interacting on Twitter and on Facebook and in Voxer and in all these spaces that are digital spaces. Do we see it differently than, say, someone who someone who doesn't interact in those spaces as much? Does that change the conversation maybe?
I would agree. And actually, funny story. A week or so ago, I was watching a webinar that our friend Heather Callahan was doing about students in social media and some of the internship stuff that both of our schools are doing. And I was like, it was a national webinar. I forget who put it on, but I was amazed at how just the questions being asked. Like, oh, Twitter's blocked in our, like, we don't do that. Our admin don't do that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, really? Like, they were so focused on the tool and not worried about like the opportunity that it gives you. I mean, it was, her and I talked afterwards. Like, I was just amazed. And so I think, you know, you might be right. And that gets to Amber's point about, you know, we don't talk about it like that, you know, where we are, you know, in our, whatever, in my career. So,
right. I guess two things. Like, I think about conversations I've already had with my children who are using social media and are in those digital spaces, and conversations we've had about the way in which you interact with people, the things you should say and shouldn't say, the tone of how something comes across. Like, we've had those conversations, whereas many people maybe haven't with their kids. And then the other thing, I think about a conversation I had today with some folks on my team, and we were discussing privacy rules and privacy laws, and when we're tweeting things out from classrooms, how careful do we have to be with the information we're sharing in terms of a picture of a kid, names of kids, those kinds of things. And one of the people on my team kind of made this comment about, like, you know, because it wouldn't be hard for you know, if I tweet something about a kid at a particular school and the name of the teacher, that someone couldn't come and, you know, see them on the playground and, you know, just say, I don't have my badge, but you're, you know, I know that you're in Mr. So-and-so's class and you're supposed to come with me. And like, that argument really bothers me sometimes. And I said to to my team, I was like, let's not conflate two things, right? There are bad things that happen on social media, but there are almost zero examples
right.
of teachers, of schools sharing that kind of information, and a child being abducted or an attempt at being abducted. Like, those things don't happen. Where those happen are kids sharing things they shouldn't be sharing on their own accounts. So it really does become this problematic area for me, because, and she is the person on my team who kind of brought this up, is not somebody who uses a lot of social media, isn't online a lot. And it seemed like this kind of fear thing that really, I think, sways that conversation too.
Yeah. Well, I think it, you know, we can kind of sum this up by me being right, and we can move on from there. I will not. Yeah, we don't need to tell Amber and Ben that I do kind of agree with what they're saying, yeah. and I'll just kind of stick with what I said on Twitter. So,
and I agree with you. I'm not disagreeing. I just think that it's probably one of those conversations that there's a heck of a lot more nuance involved in that, and it's hard to make it a, you know, somebody's right, somebody's wrong kind of thing, because there are just these tiny little things that make it a completely different conversation.
You mean social media and the internet has a gray area?
Right. Whoa. Who would know? Who would have guessed?
I had no clue. All right, dad moment of the week. So one of the things that we have done, we've talked about this before. I have a social media intern who's a high school student who is a fabulous young man. His expertise is a lot different than the fabulous social media intern I had last spring. His big thing is athletics and graphics, and thank goodness, because that is not a strength of mine, although I am trying to learn, I'm trying to get better. But to do those kinds of things, you kind of have to be at events, and it's well known. Well, I don't know if it's well known. I think we've talked about it here. I do not live in the same district as I work in, and it makes for some long evenings. But what has made it a lot more fun is that my son has been able to come to a couple of football games, and the last 2 Tuesdays, or maybe it wasn't last Tuesday, recently my daughter has been able to accompany me to a couple of volleyball games. So for as much as those days can be long, it is a lot more fun to be able to do that with the kids, and they kind of see a little bit of what I do, although taking pictures in social media, you know, as you know, is not really on the job description of technology integration, but it is part of duties I have acquired over the last 4 or 5 years at Lewis Central, and I love it. It's fun to see the kids at night. It's fun to see the athletes. I mean, and be a part of that atmosphere. But my daughter has enjoyed it. I'm pretty sure that it is for my son, it's being able to be on the field.
Yeah.
For my daughter, it's the snacks. My son, it's probably the field and the snacks, but oh well, they still come, so it's all good.
Well, and the pictures of her taking pictures last night were kind of fun too. So.
Yeah, last night my intern had to work. Apparently, he prefers the job that pays the money over the job that doesn't.
Yes.
And so she's like, "Can I take pictures?" I'm like, "Sure." So I started popping my M&Ms. Perfect. Works out well. I get a couple pictures. She did take a couple though that, like one of the players was like bending over, and I'm like, no, we got to work on like what we're looking for. I can't use that anywhere. Delete
and get that off of my phone.
Exactly. Yeah, I don't need that on my memory card. So no, it's fun. We had a good time. That picture in particular, she took it. She's like, oh, that's not what I thought I was going to get.
It's good to learn.
Here's how you delete. Exactly.
That's right. My dad moment of the week, I feel like I've had a lot of these lately that have been around or centered around kind of changes of Gracie, especially being able to drive. But the other day, I was home from work wasn't feeling great. And so Gracie had already driven in for cross country. She had the car at school, which meant she was going to drive home. And she actually stopped and heard my wife's parents kind of live on the route between school and home. And so she stopped and picked up her sister. And so they were driving home together. And it was another example of kind of using, I don't know if I've talked about it on here or not, but we use that Life 360 app, which kind of tells us where everybody is and if we have a driver, how fast they're driving and if they have to brake hard and all these things. So, I'm essentially following them on the Life 360 app all the way home to make sure they're safe. But it was really handy when neither Aaron nor I had to run in and pick them up, and she could just drive them home. So we are really kind of taking advantage of this right now.
Does she like driving?
She likes driving, but it's not like if we all go somewhere, she like says, let me drive. There'll be times we'll say, hey, you want to drive? Like, nah. She'd rather sit in the back with her headphones on and probably just ride along. But I think she likes having some of that freedom that comes with driving yourself and driving in the morning and sometimes home at night. So yeah, it's been great.
Good. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's that time of the show where we get smarter because we bring in a guest. Tonight, we are pleased to be joined by Patrick Donovan. Patrick is a Patrick is a tech coach in Ames, Iowa. You would think I could get that out. Oh, well. Patrick's appearance tonight is sponsored by Huffy. Finally ready to take your bike's training wheels off? Look to Huffy for the best 12-inch bikes on the market. Patrick, since I murdered your intro, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
All right. Well, first off, I have a wife and a son. My son's going to turn 8 next month. So that's fun. And he's in 2nd grade. So it's, and I work in the same district as him. So that's always interesting because, when he started kindergarten was the first year they went 1-to-1 in our elementary schools. And so he had a brand new elementary teacher to our district who had already met me because we talked about the technology. So that was fun. So all of the teachers know me now. But live in Ames, Iowa. I've been a tech coach now for my 6th year, and I taught high school science for 9 years before that.
So you've been doing this long enough, and you mentioned how the teachers know you and stuff. You've been doing the tech coach thing for a while. Can you talk a little bit, because we've talked before on the show about like how that position has changed or evolved over time? Like thinking back to 5-6 years ago when you were first doing it, similar time to kind of when I started working doing that stuff too, maybe a little longer. But talk about how it's changed over that 5 or 6 years.
The first year I was in my role was our first year as a 1-to-1 at our high school. And so it was a lot of getting teachers. I had experience in a 1-to-1. I taught for 3 years in a 1-to-1. So for a lot of things, it's just how do you manage things? How do you, classroom management stuff, what options are out there. But the last year or so, I've been working very closely with our instructional coaches, our TOSAs, our teachers on special assignment, for everybody who doesn't know all the nice acronyms, pretty much district level coaches. And I've been doing a lot with accessibility. It's more about, I think now it's working with teachers trying to get to that deeper levels of learning using technology. Whereas I think early on, it was a lot of just how do I get going? We have teachers who are flying ahead. We still have teachers who avoid it. It's like the plague. They don't want to deal with it. But I think the big shift has moved away from management to more about innovation, I guess, or at least newer ways of doing things.
Right. Do you think, I'm going to hold on, Josh. I've got one more, just kind of a quick follow-up there. So you talk about those teachers who still kind of, and I think we all deal with it, that are still a little bit hesitant, reluctant to kind of dive into that. Do you think, because for folks that you're working with and for folks that I work with, it's been 5 or 6 years now, right? Do you think that ever changes, or does it just happen with time and turnover?
I always hope it's going to happen. I don't want to have to wait until we have a whole brand new staff. And it's not always an age thing. I think it's more about their educational philosophy and what they think learning is. Yeah. I've been reading a book about universal design of learning, and a big part of that was just, it comes down to your beliefs about what you believe learning is and what measurement of learning is. So, I mean, I've worked with, today I sent out an email. I wanted to start, and I hate naming things. I am the worst person for naming things. Like for sessions at conferences, I hate that. I would hire somebody to do that for me. But I want to start what I call an innovation cohort. Just people to meet like before school, after school, to focus on those deeper levels of learning. And I had 6, 7 people reach out to me right away, say, yes, I'd love to do it. One of them even said, I would love to do this. Might be my last year of teaching. I'm like, all right, that's great. I mean, you're still wanting to do this. I think if you get to the why, and maybe we don't spend always enough time with the why are we doing this, sharing out the deep impact we can have. Some people who really didn't want to work with me at the beginning, they ended up using technology, but more for efficiency's sake than anything. Yeah. So I guess if you can get to the why, that'd be great. But I hope, I always hope people are going to use it, just because there is so much potential, so much possibility out there with technology.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to get really Iowa in this podcast now, because you brought up instructional coaches. So I started at Lewis Central the year before we signed on to TLC, and we went from really 0 instructional coaches to 1 per grade level almost. That completely changed my job role. I don't present in front of staff all that much anymore, although it's kind of picked up a little bit this year. But I have really relied on them as kind of like my eyes and ears out there. How has adding instructional coaches and TOSAs impacted what you're doing?
When I started, Ames had instructional coaches, but not many. So we had one at the high school, and I have worked with her a lot over the last 5 years. We're up to 3 at the high school. We have 3 at the middle school and a tech coach. And then we have 1 in every building, elementary and preschool. It's much easier to work with them. And, ideally, they're also using technology effectively when they're working with students or working with teachers. I know at the high school, kind of first couple of years going, Katie, our instructional coach there, her and I spent a ton of time. We still spend a ton of time together. But I, introduced her to TPAC and SAMR, and pretty much got to the point where she was using TPAC phrase more often than I was. She'd bring it up at times. Like, oh yeah, we could use that. But I think for one thing, it's always going to be that focus on student learning. And it's just about, trying to take the focus off the tech. But for me, it's just nice to be able to I work with them all the time, and having coaches help me. I need time to reflect, to plan. Even before I sent out that email today, I had them look it over, and I oftentimes have a coaching conversation with them before I do anything, just because I need that extra help myself. But I think we get deeper work with coaches than other forms of PD.
Right. How hard is it and some people work in districts like this, that I know that you do, to overcome, when you have really bad tech directors, and it's hard to kind of overcome that, and you've got Josh, stop laughing. It's not funny.
No, it's very true.
We have to deal with those people, and in Ames, obviously, you have to deal with Carl. And I'm just wondering how the tech department can really put a big roadblock in the things that the really innovative, cool, great tech coaches want to do.
So, and you guys had Carl on a couple episodes ago. I actually worked with Carl at our previous district. So I worked with him for 4 years before he left me to come to Ames, and left me with a new tech director, also a new principal, a new superintendent, all that. It was a fun year. In that 1 year, it was actually this is like my story, why I think I'll just follow Carl from district to district, because I know we align so much when we think about pedagogy and the role technology should play. I had a new tech director for a year without him. And within the first month, all of a sudden, second period, YouTube was blocked in the middle of my class, which wouldn't be a big thing, except I had a flipped classroom where all my videos were on YouTube. There's also a mastery style, so everybody's doing something a little bit different. But we're in their middle of class, and all of a sudden half the hands go up. And I'm like, this can't be good. And I had to ask them, they're like, YouTube's not working. I'm like, oh, that's silly. It's working. And I try to get it on my machine, and it's not working. So I call down to the tech director, and he's like, oh, yeah, we blocked it because some kids were streaming music.
Right.
I'm like, okay, I'm going to be down in 1 second so we can have a discussion about this. One of my times I got maybe a little loud in my job. But yeah, I know, and I talk with other people, is just, if you don't have a tech director who is focused on learning with a teaching background, I think that just makes everything so much harder, because if they go to blocking first instead of teaching first, that's, we were at a school in August for a teacher leadership day. I won't name the school, but they blocked Twitter. And so we're there for a day of learning, and I can't get on Twitter because my cell phone service didn't work either. I was upset. I'm like, I'm in a conference learning mode. I need my Twitter. Okay. I have a hashtag. I want to follow it.
Right.
I may have made some comments to their school board member about that.
And in all honesty, I mean, I want to point out, Carl, it's nice to work with people like Carl who really do have kind of best interest for kids at heart, and what we can really do to change. I work in a similar, a place where our tech director works so closely with our teaching and learning folks that it really does enhance the things that you're able to do. And you're kind of lucky to be in that position.
Yep.
So Jim York chiming in from O'Neill. His question on our YouTube page: how can small schools that don't have tech integrationists or instructional coaches help their teachers become better teachers with tech? He said he's asking for a friend of his, so the two things that I put back to him, one would be the service agency, his ESUs, the one that he has up there, and then the other thing I said is getting them connected with others via Twitter.
Right.
I mean, what are some other things that you guys can think of for, and for those of you that don't know, Iowa has a teacher leadership plan, which is why, our small school can have one instructional coach per grade level. That's how a lot of the instructional coaches are funded. And we know that not every state is the same way, but for those states or those people that don't have that, Patrick, what are some other ways that either you did before or you can think of to do that now?
I think you said the kind of thing. So in Iowa, we have our AEAs, or area education agencies, and I know a lot of the people that work there, and they're a couple of my friends, so I have to say that. But no, they do a great job. And if you have people like that, I worked at a small school where we, our class size was 60, and really at the time when we were one-to-one, there weren't a lot of our teachers using it effectively, and we didn't have that resource. So again, I had Carl as my tech director that helped, but yeah, Twitter was my big thing. I went to every conference I could. If I could beg, borrow, and plead to get to a conference, I'm going to go. But that's when I really got into Twitter, was because I had to learn, and I didn't have those resources available. I guess, there are blogs and stuff out there. They still exist. But I would honestly, social media for me was a big thing.
And it seems like, aside from getting, having teachers connect with other people, it's so easy to put together the resources now, right? So, as a principal in a small building or in a small district, it is easy for me to go out and find all of this really great content that already exists. As I think about, Eric Kurtz and his Control All the Chief stuff. I mean, so much good stuff there that if I wanted them to learn something, it wouldn't be on me as the principal to necessarily have to create all that content. The content is there. So it's a matter of not only being connected to the people, but it's also being connected to or aware of that content and that really great stuff that's already out there. And I think that's where we still lag as schools. We either feel like we have to pay a company to give us content, or that we have to create all the content on our own. And I think there really is this kind of middle area that might be the best, where it's like, I'll go out and find some of this content, or have my coaches go find, or if you don't have coaches, I'll have some teachers that are connected, go find this content. Or I'll go, as Jim is connected to lots of people, lots of us online, I'm going to go to find those people who do this and say, hey, where can I find some content to share with my people? And it seems like that's maybe a lost opportunity too often.
Yeah, I know Josh uses Flipboard, and I use Flipboard on our, that was one of the first things I did in my role, is I created an ed tech site for our high school, but our district really, just to curate all those resources, because, you don't need to meet with me one-on-one to get help. There's all these things already out there. Yeah. Eric Kurtz, I don't know how he puts all the stuff out that he does.
Yeah.
He's got to drink more caffeine than me, and I don't know how that's possible. But the stuff like that, and like Richard Burns' site, Free Tech for Teachers, is I go to that like every other day just to check, just in case. Yep. Yeah, those are definitely big resources. They're freely available out there.
And I still say, for the three of us, like if I know that the three of us do it, and lots of other people, if I have a question, I go ask some people. Say, hey, you guys doing this, or how do I do this? That still seems like the best way, especially if I'm in a small, potentially rural location where I don't have the actual physical people there. It sure seems awfully easy to go out and find those people now, though.
I think that shows the value of social media, and like Patrick, you were saying, the value of being at a conference where you can start, maybe you've already started that relationship online, but you can, meet those people face to face. And like Devin said, because of the conferences I've been fortunate enough to attend, I've gotten to know a lot of those people, and I do feel more comfortable, shooting Eric Kurtz a message, or, having a conversation with Richard Byrne about who stole his latest blog post and all that. So speaking of content creation, which we kind of were, you had mentioned that you just got done recording your own podcast, which I hear in late May had a phenomenal guest on it. So you run a co-host a podcast called Friendly Disruption. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yep. So it's Friendly Disruption. We just had our podcast tonight with Luis Perez, great author, speaker, all about accessibility, universal design of learning. Those are kind of the main topics we focus on. And Craig and Maggie, they're both in Cedar Rapids area. They both are entering new jobs this year. So this was our first podcast of the school year. But, we're constantly I think that's our big thing, is accessibility. And I actually they asked me to join last year after iTech. So after last October, because I presented a session on accessibility, that's been kind of one of my focal areas the last year or so, which luckily got started at ISTE back in 2017. So that's when I really started presenting more and more about accessibility, which is an important topic. And I think that's one area that technology should easily help us out. But yeah, our podcast mostly focuses on that. Craig and Maggie both work in that area. Craig, very public about the fact that he's a dyslexic, so he has that background. I have my hearing issues back from when I was a kid that, I still have reduced hearing nowadays. And so that gives us a little bit of a perspective on that, especially when we're talking about our students. I work with a lot of our students that need that extra help, whether it is dyslexia, vision issues, hearing issues, social emotional, something along those lines.
Well, and I want to follow up real quick, because I saw Luis at ISTE this year, and I did not know who he was until they walked him out on the stage. So talk a little bit about his story, his background, and if you can give us a sneak peek, ours will go up about the same time yours will tomorrow.
Actually, we just Craig got the link out, so we're already posted. But okay. No, yeah, that works. Luis, he works with accessible education materials is kind of a big thing with CAST, which is a big organization dealing with accessibility, universal design. He has a book out, which I was hoping to finish before our podcast tonight, and the squirrels got the best of me, as I say. I get distracted. I dive into UDL is the book. And I know he talked about a story, and ISTE was nice enough to post that onto YouTube, which I think is great, even though it was, ISTE doesn't always post everything. They at least posted that talk. His story is how his vision, he's going blind. He's mostly blind. And then how that affects what he does. And I didn't get the chance to ask him a whole lot. I'm curious about how, because I've been communicating with him on, email, and I know he's on Twitter. I'm very curious how he does those things, because that's something very personal to him, and I know it's something. If you go onto YouTube and ISTE and check his name, Luis Perez, you'll find the video. But he does talk about for him struggling with that, it hit a low point. But he talks about how do we design for all students, not just for the average student, which only exists in a statistics textbook, but really how are we designing for everybody so that everybody can learn as best they can.
A couple of quick Iowa questions before we kind of wrap up with one final question. So first, you've mentioned iTech a couple of times. We have that coming up in just a few weeks now here. You want to talk a little bit about, you've been somebody who has presented at iTech. You've been part of making that a successful event. Talk about what you like about that event specifically for the state of Iowa.
Well, I think we have our two big conferences for EdTech as far as this whole state goes. 1-to-1 in the spring, iTech in October. I always love presenting there because it's a great chance to have conversations with people. I go more now for the conversations with the people there than some of the sessions, but that's just because my learning level of that. I know that iTech does a great job bringing some great keynotes, and this year I'm really looking forward to both keynotes. Ken Shelton is definitely one, as we talked about. Whoops, I just lost my headphones. As we talk about equity in that is, that's kind of a big thing. I am running for iTech board, so a little plug for that. And I am presenting twice on Monday because, got to get that out of the way. I'm happy about that. I like getting my presentations done with. But I think the best thing about it is that we're bringing a lot of people across the state of Iowa together to have conversations, sharing out what they're doing. That's always my favorite part, is always going to be the conversations.
Yeah. And then secondly, Iowa question, you have participated in RAGBRAI, the bike ride across the state of Iowa, which is has its own kind of fame. Talk about how you got started doing that, what you find enjoyable about riding all those miles, because it sounds awful to me. But talk about how that came out, what you like about that event.
For those that don't know, RAGBRAI is a 7-day bike ride across Iowa, which is about 450, 500 miles. And Iowa is not really that flat, especially near the rivers, because if you say it's all flat, I get upset because I had to go up those hills. Back in really 2014, I was trying to get healthier, lose weight, and biking was always the thing, even since a kid, I like to do. So I'm like, all right, we'll find something to do with biking. So we thought we'll do I found a couple other people crazy enough to join me. We formed a team. We thought, oh, we'll do a day of it. Then we're like, well, we'll just time for the whole week, see what happens. And then we biked across the whole state. It is really a very interesting experience. It is kind of a carnival on wheels, because there is such a diverse, we'll say, a group of people that do this. For some people, it's a party, 7-day party, and that includes some biking. I'm not sure how they do that, because I barely survived the first year. I remember getting to you go start in Missouri River on the west side of the state, you end up in the Mississippi River on the east side of the state. And I didn't know if I was going to stop before I got to the Mississippi River. I thought I was just so tired, I was just going to keep biking into it and just float away down. It helped me really. It was the most physical thing I'd ever done. It is still one of my top achievements, just because I survived. And I know I got passed by like an 80-year-old guy going uphill, and I still felt good about it, just because we did the whole week. And that was in 2015. We did it again 2017. Last year, all but one day, I took my birthday day off because I was sore and tired. My back hurt. I'm like, I'm not. It's going to rain. I am driving that day. And I did one day this year because I went into Ames, and I got the chance to bike around Jack Trice Stadium, home of the Iowa State Cyclones. I couldn't bypass that. it's still nuts. The people that do this, I'm not even sure why I do it. It's a great physical challenge. But you get sunburned, you get like my lips got sunburned. I didn't know that could happen that bad. And you're sitting on a bike for 450 plus miles. I took like that first year we did it. I didn't do anything for the next week. I sent my son to daycare. It was summertime. I didn't care. I was home on the couch in the air conditioning. I was not moving. I love to bike just because, I can go out for a quick 20, 30 mile bike ride and it really isn't much these days.
Yeah.
And that feels good.
Right. And it really is. I haven't done it. I've talked to a lot of people who have. We watched them ride by when it started close to us. It started in Council Bluffs and they rode through Underwood where we live. We went out and watched them and waved and kind of looked at the party atmosphere. But I mean, it's kind of a big deal. I know Lance Armstrong comes pretty much every year now and rides it. So it is really cool. And I commend you, boy. I was joking about not wanting to do it and being able to ride the hills. There's nothing in me that says, let's go ride the 450, 500 miles across the state of Iowa. Because you're right. It's not flat.
If you do it in central and northern Iowa, it's okay. Anytime it goes south, I'm like, we're not even going near that because it's worse, especially the river valleys are horrible. The first day of RegBred we ever did, it was 75 miles and I think 3,000 feet of climb. And we were not ready for it because all of our training was on flat ground in central Iowa. It is flat in central Iowa. And I just remember all of us were kind of considering quitting after that first day, and somehow we did it. But I got off my bike after 75 miles and I made the mistake of laying down and I had a leg cramp for 30 minutes. It was unpleasant, but we still did it and, it was fun, but I'll avoid Southern Iowa. I'm not doing that.
So Josh, you and I will do Dads and Ed on the road on bikes in central Iowa only where it's flat.
Yep.
Nebraska has their own bike ride across Nebraska. Brand. It's a little bit flatter. Even the river valleys aren't nearly as bad as what they are in Iowa, and they start out west too, so you roll downhill theoretically. I'm pretty sure we're not going to be on the RegBred brochure anytime soon after that commentary from Patrick. But Patrick, one of the things that this podcast is really based off of is that intersection of parenting and being in education. So you mentioned you have a second grader. How has those two things impacted each other? How has your role as a parent impacted your role as an educator and vice versa?
I feel more informed, I think, than a lot of parents, I guess. That's always the thing. We're talking a lot about, I know you guys were talking about digital citizenship before I came on. I'm thinking about that with my son from the start. I try to be more aware, like even what is he doing online? What can he be doing online? It's interesting because I don't work at all with the elementary, really. I'm not supposed to. Sometimes I do. But my job's mostly at the high school level, but his teachers still know who I am and that. And the first year, like I said, his kindergarten teacher, she had the Chromebooks open, asking parents to join the Facebook group. She was showing all the stuff she had. She had the wrong link up at first for her Google form she was using also. So while we're there for like the open house night, I'm like quickly fixing it for her and just saying, I'll just help you. You're busy with, I can't help but do that. But I think their teachers know me. His teachers know me. They know they can reach out if they need to. But I try to, be that parent who's not going to comment on pedagogy or anything like that if I disagree. And I know more information than most parents, especially when it comes to stuff at our district level or behavior or stuff like that. It's hard for me to walk that line. I love sending my wife in there instead. I'll send the lawyer at them and I'll just let me kind of just be on the sidelines. But it is always, I think, a tricky battle just because I am a teacher in the district. I'm at the same level. But because of my role as a tech coach, and especially in the one-to-one classrooms, I think sometimes teachers already have a perception of what I'm going to say. So trying to avoid that, I guess.
Yeah, I know I've had a couple teachers in my current district that said if we ever moved over there, they didn't want my kids. Okay, awesome. Good to know. I'll write that down.
Yep.
Patrick, we do appreciate your time. We do have one more segment called Sharing is Caring, where you can share any person, tool, anything you want. It doesn't have to be education related, but it sure can be. You have time to stick around for that?
Yep.
All right. I mean, you've been podcasting for 5 hours now. You might as well, do it for 10 more minutes, right?
I'll leave this room at some point tonight.
Reintroduce yourself to your wife and kid.
Yep.
So this week I was listening to a friend of the show, Dr. Robert Dillon, only 2-time guest on the show at this point. He was on the mothership of the Education Podcast Network, the House of Ed Tech, hosted by the godfather of the Education Podcast Network, Chris Nesi. And they were talking about design spaces, learning design, classroom design, all those things that if you follow at Dr. Robert Dillon on Twitter, he has a book out recently about parent connections, but his one prior to that was about learning spaces. Phenomenal stuff. And it's something that I've actually had some really good conversations with some of our staff about. And then about 3/4 of the way through, he mentioned this website that is in beta that he's been working with called the Earshot app. And what it does is it will listen to your lesson and it will take and analyze that using artificial intelligence and tell you how long you talked, how long the kids talked, and the type of questions that you're asking them. So I happened to send it to our administrators and instructional coaches and some other folks I've been having this conversation with. And my boss came back later in the day and was like, yeah, we were actually at a workshop and it fit right in with what we were talking about. And so we have a couple of us that have signed up for their beta because it gets after a lot of things that that we've been doing. I have no idea what the cost is. I have no idea what it looks like. I've requested more information. But if something you're interested in, check out theearshotapp.com. And I will tweet that out on the Dads and Ed hashtag. So pretty excited about that.
Yeah, it sounds
Devin?
interesting. So I'm going to share a blog post that I read recently. It was shared by Bud Hunt at Bud the Teacher on Twitter. We need to get on the show, by the way. I think he'd be a good guest. And it was called "Start with Low-Hanging Fruit. Resistance is Good." And really what the whole thing was about is this idea that oftentimes we go after what we call low-hanging fruit, or the easy things to pick. And that while resisting that temptation might be a good thing. It might not always be fruitful to pick the low-hanging fruit. That sometimes it's low-hanging because it's ready to fall off and it's overly ripe and it's rotted inside. And so it was a really interesting look. It was written by a lady named Katie Henry Days. And I will share that on Twitter, but it's worth a read if you're thinking about how and why we go after change and why it may not always be our goals might not always align with going after that low-hanging fruit, even though it seems easy. So interesting read that I'll share.
Awesome. All right, Patrick, we stall long enough?
Yep, I got one. So actually, I'm going to give a shout out to kind of one of my friends, Leslie Prale Osborne. On Twitter, it's L Prale Osborne, Pralle. Just because, again, changing kind of nature of ed tech. She was an ed tech person at AEA. She still is. But she's doing a lot of work lately on how to have those maybe uncomfortable conversations around equity and race, and especially with students. And that's, a big thing we're talking about in my district, and something I think is very common in a lot of districts, especially nowadays. But she's sharing out her perspective on it as a mother too, from her family perspective, but also then the work she's doing in the classroom, stuff like that. And so I think she's putting out a lot of good stuff. And I really think we need to have more voices and more conversations about that. It's just, I've learned a lot in the last year because of the work we've had to do, but it's always nice to hear more and more about that from different perspectives.
Absolutely. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that wraps up show number 88. Patrick, thanks so much for taking time out of your evening to join us. Looking forward to seeing you here in right about a month in Des Moines. And we will be back with the podcast here in 2 weeks.
All right. Thank